What if the words that shook the internet were never meant to be taken at face value? And what if a single sentence, lifted from context, transformed into the loudest rumor of them all? Because when the phrase "Dylan Wang is my husband" began racing across timelines, it felt less like news and more like an earthquake. Screens froze. Fan communities erupted. Headlines multiplied. And one question echoed louder than any other. Did Shen Yue really say it? To understand why this moment felt so explosive, we must slow the story down. Strip away the noise. Return to the source. Because in the age of viral clips and fragmented context, truth is often the first thing to disappear. The moment did not arrive as a formal announcement. There was no press conference, no official statement, no confirmation from management. Instead, there was a fragment, a line, a moment captured out of sequence and released into a world hungry for meaning. And that hunger turned speculation into spectacle. This story isn't over. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. We follow the moments and emotions of your favorite TV stars. Stay with us. For years, Shen Yue and Dylan Wang have existed as more than just actors to their audience. They are symbols of a generation-defining story. Their on-screen chemistry in Meteor Garden became a cultural imprint. For many, it was not just a drama, but a shared emotional memory. A time when innocence, ambition, and connection collided. So when a phrase resembling a confession surfaced, it did not land in neutral ground. It landed in history. But here is where the story becomes more complicated and more revealing. Those who examined the clip closely noticed inconsistencies. The tone did not match a public declaration. The setting did not resemble a personal announcement. The words appeared within a broader context, possibly playful, metaphorical, scripted, or emotionally symbolic rather than literal. Yet context rarely travels as fast as shock. Within hours, the phrase was detached from its origin and reborn as a headline. Fans did not ask what she meant. They asked what it meant for them. Was it a joke taken seriously? A line from a role mistaken for reality? A symbolic statement about partnership rather than marriage? Or simply a mistranslation amplified by desire? The truth is, none of these possibilities are unusual. In an industry where actors live between character and self, lines blur easily. A single sentence can become a story no one intended to tell. And still, the reaction tells us something important. It tells us that the DyShen narrative never truly ended. Because if it had, the world would not have stopped to listen. The power of that alleged confession was not in its accuracy. It was in what it represented. A fantasy long protected. A question long unanswered. A possibility people never stopped hoping for, even as they claimed to move on. Shen Yue herself has always been careful with words. Measured. Intentional. Not known for reckless declarations. That alone should have invited caution. And yet, caution struggled to survive against emotion. This is the paradox of modern fame. Reality becomes less important than resonance. And the resonance was undeniable. Fans replayed old interviews, re-examined body language, reconnected dots that may never have been connected at all. Suddenly, every quiet interaction felt like evidence. Every past moment felt prophetic. But speculation is not confirmation. And storytelling, when untethered from truth, can become dangerous. What likely happened is not a confession that changed everything, but a moment that revealed how much everything still matters to people. How deeply the story of two young stars intertwined with the emotions of millions. If Shen Yue ever chooses to speak plainly about her private life, it will not come wrapped in ambiguity. It will not be delivered through fragments. It will not rely on interpretation. Until then, what exists is not revelation, but reflection. A mirror held up to fandom, to memory, to the enduring power of a story that refuses to fade. Perhaps the real shock is not the sentence itself. Perhaps it is the realization that years later, one line, real or imagined, still has the power to stop time. That is not the result of scandal. That is the result of connection. And so the phrase continues to circulate, not because it is proven, but because it touches something unresolved. something human, something that exists between nostalgia and hope. Whether spoken seriously, symbolically, or misunderstood entirely, the words ignited a truth far deeper than rumor. That Shen Yue and Wang are still emotionally linked in the public imagination, that their story still carries weight, and that some narratives never truly belong to facts alone. They belong to feeling. And feeling, once awakened, is impossible to silence. And it is within that feeling that the story continues to unfold, quietly reshaping itself with every retelling. Because after the initial shock settled, something deeper replaced the chaos. A pause, a collective breath, and then a more unsettling realization began to surface. What if this moment was never about marriage at all? What if it was about language, symbolism, and the dangerous way meaning mutates once it leaves the mouth of the speaker and enters the echo chamber of the world? In many cultures, words like husband are not always literal. They can be playful, metaphorical, a way of expressing familiarity, loyalty, or an emotional bond rather than a legal one. In acting, in interviews, in casual conversation, such phrases can carry warmth without permanence. But the internet does not wait for nuance. It does not ask how something was said. It asks how it can be heard. And once the phrase took on a life of its own, it stopped belonging to Shen Yue entirely. It became a symbol, a trigger, a spark that reignited everything fans had carefully packed away and labeled as the past. What followed was not confirmation, but reinterpretation. Old interviews resurfaced, suddenly heavy, with imagined subtext. Moments once dismissed as coincidence were recast as foreshadowing. Even silence itself became suspicious. Because when people expect denial and receive none, they often mistake restraint for admission. But silence can mean many things. It can mean confusion at how far a moment has traveled. It can mean frustration at being misunderstood. It can mean a deliberate refusal to fuel a fire that was never intentionally lit. And in this case, silence may have been the only responsible choice. Because to clarify too quickly would validate the distortion. And to deny too strongly would only deepen the spectacle. Sometimes, the only way to protect truth is to let noise exhaust itself. Still, the emotional impact lingered. Not because fans believed a wedding had happened, but because the possibility reopened something dormant. It reminded people why DyShen mattered in the first place. They were never about grand declarations. They were about ease, comfort, the rare kind of chemistry that feels lived in rather than performed. A connection that felt recognizable, not manufactured. And that is why even a misunderstood sentence could feel like a confession. Because in the collective memory, the bond always felt deeper than what was shown. But here is the most important part of the story. Even if the words were never meant as a declaration, the reaction revealed something undeniable. That both Shen Yue and Wang are still held together by a shared narrative larger than either of them. A narrative built not on contracts or confirmation, but on emotional truth as experienced by those who watched them grow. That is not something either of them can fully control. And perhaps they should not have to. Actors are allowed to exist beyond the stories projected onto them. They are allowed to speak casually without their words being carved into prophecy. They are allowed to care, to joke, to remember, without being trapped by interpretation. If Shen Yue ever truly wanted to announce something that changes everything, it would not arrive as ambiguity. It would arrive as clarity. Until then, what the world witnessed was not a confession. It was a collision between memory and expectation, between intimacy and intrusion, between a private bond and public hunger. And in that collision, one thing became clear. The DyShen story is no longer just theirs. It belongs to a generation that grew up watching them, to fans who attached pieces of their own youth to that connection, to a time when everything felt simpler, brighter, more sincere. That is why one sentence could feel so powerful, not because it confirmed anything, but because it reminded everyone how deeply they still care. So maybe the real truth is not hidden in whether Shen Yue meant those words literally. Maybe the truth is this, that even now, years later, The idea of Dylan Wang and Shen Yue choosing each other still feels possible enough to shake the world. And until reality draws a clear line, that possibility will continue to exist. Not as fact, not as fiction, but as a story suspended between what was, what is, and what people still hope might be. And sometimes, that suspension is exactly where story lives the longest. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe so you don't miss out next episode.